There we go. So welcome and thank you very much for joining us. We are really, really pleased to have Rosemary talking to us again. We've had a bit of a skip on our talks for the RCM for a few months, partly due, well, pretty much entirely due to the pandemic. Our previous speakers who were to be joining us, which were from the Australian Rhododendron Society, unfortunately, because of the increase in their lockdown, weren't able to join us and show us their gardens, which they were hoping to. So we've had to postpone and reorganize that for another time. And then unfortunately we had cases of COVID in my own family and flu for myself. So we had a bit of a skip in some of our RCM presentations, but we're really happy to be back again online and joined by Rosemary Legrand. Rosemary, I'm just going to give a little bit of information about you for those people who don't know you. Rosemary is not only an incredible speaker and a lovely lady, but she's also a former nursery owner. She's been giving talks for over 30 years to international organizations and on specialist cruise tours. She's on the RHS Speakers Register and also the National Association of Flower Rangers Societies. And she's written articles and publications for the RHS and is also chairman of our branch for the New Forest for the Rhododendron, Camellia and Magnolia group. So a busy lady. It's hard to sometimes book a date in with you, Rosemary, isn't it? And so we're really pleased to have you here talking about your fantastic journey to Bhutan. Welcome. You know, please go ahead and tell us all about it.
Thank you very much, Wendelin. And it's delightful to be with you all. And I hope it's not too late to wish everyone a very happy 2022. Let me just get into the talk. I'm just, we haven't got the link hasn't come up there. Here we are. Now it has. Brilliant. There.
Are you able to make that full screen? Yeah, fantastic.
There we are. Well, I realized a dream in 2007 when I went to literally explore the wonderful, unique Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan. Because as a child, I'd spent hours with my rhododendron hybridist father in our nursery, and he used to tell me amazing stories, and I used to be spellbound by the names of these places: Sikkim, Assam, Nepal and Bhutan. So to actually go there was wonderful. I went in 2007 and I traveled for 18 days. It was a botanical tour. And if you imagine, I started the tour sort of the end of April into the beginning of May, which was really an optimum time. Well, let's start our journey together. And one of the incredible things is to realize that a small country the size of Switzerland can literally enclose this amazing collection of plants. We're looking at 5,000 different species of plants, shrubs and trees, and that includes 50 species of rhododendrons alone and 600 species of orchids. Well, I like to refer to this as my gateway to mystical Bhutan, or the Drukyul is the name that they use in Bhutan, which translates to the kingdom of the thunder dragon. Well, a lot of people say, where is it situated? And on this map, we can see that it is surrounded basically by China and India. If we look up into the top left-hand corner, we're looking towards Tibet. And when you look at the country itself, it's divided into 3 geographical regions. And that means that it actually has 3 different climatic zones. So if we look at the bottom of the map in India, and we're looking at the area here between Assam and West Bengal, that is where your tropical plants are. So it's very much warmer, and you see some really interesting tender plants. And then the center of Bhutan is where the temperate plants are, the temperate plants that we can grow and enjoy here. And then at the top, where the mountain ranges are, that is where you'll find the Alpines. Well, our amazing tour started with a flight to Delhi, and from there to Bagdogra. And that's still in India. This is where we were met by our charming Bhutanese guide on the right-hand side, Karma Dorji, and our wonderful driver, Kinzang, on the left. And to go to Bhutan, you have to have a Bhutanese guide. You have to be accompanied by a Bhutanese guide. And behind it is our little tour bus. Well, for quite some distance, still in India, we traveled through the expansive tea gardens. So here you can see the tea plantations, very lush, healthy looking plants of Camellia sinensis. And the ladies were walking along the railroad. You can see the track here, and they were carrying great big bundles, heavy bundles of vines, and they used this for fodder for the animals. I shall always remember the boy with black umbrella. He had such a delightful smile. People were so friendly and welcoming. And then when we reached the border between India and Bhutan, I cannot begin to describe how different those 2 countries. This magnificent archway that was our entrance into Bhutan, if we look back through it, you can see India, which was noisy, dusty, ramshackle. The buildings were higgledy-piggledy, and you walked through that archway and seemed to transcend into another world, which at the time of my visit was quite medieval in places. The Karbandi monastery is set on a high point, very close to that border point. And this is where we first encountered the prayer flags. Now, they're very significant in all Buddhist countries around shrines, temples, and high mountain places. Very colourful. There was a small monastery here and temple, and this was one of the young monks. His name was Kedu, and he was particularly interested in modern technology and rather pleased to see an image of himself on a camera. Now, the Queen Mother enjoys spending time here during the winter. This is her winter residence. By virtue of the fact that it is so much milder in the south of Bhutan, it's more comfortable for her. And these are some of the wild plants in her garden. We would consider them very choice. Dendrobium densiflorum on the top branch, where you can see a mass of yellow flowers, and then Dendrobium amoenum growing on the lower branch. The cyatheas too, they were flourishing here. This is Cyathea spinulosa. It's very attractive fronds. And looking down on the ground, Mimosa pudica, it tended to carpet the ground here. And of course, it's a sensitive plant. You know, if you touch the little leaves, they all close up. And above us, beautiful, scented, fragrant Hoya, just sort of tumbling down the tree. And our very first Aracema. This is Aracema galeatum. They're commonly called, as a group of plants, the cobra lilies, and there are various forms. We can grow them successfully in our gardens. They are termed as woodlanders, and great excitement as we sped on our way and somebody noticed the Dalhousii up in a tree, and the bus squealed to a halt, and we all tumbled out with binoculars and cameras because it was high up in the tree. It is an epiphytic rhododendron, which means that it doesn't have the same terrestrial roots. And there it was growing, looking very lush. We were so sad, though, that we weren't close enough to smell the fragrant blossoms. Well, we were feeling ready for lunch, and this was a most beautiful, idyllic spot to stop. There was crystal clear water tumbling down through the wooded hillside, and just to the side, that little square building is a religious shrine, a Buddhist shrine, typically Bhutanese, and it is called a chorten. And if you encounter a shrine, or you wish to turn the prayer wheels in a temple, in a Buddhist country, you have to remember to walk around it or turn them clockwise. It's a very important consideration. Now, it was a lovely spot. Unfortunately, when we got back in the bus, two of our ladies had decided to have a little paddle in the water. And when they came back on the bus, we had two uninvited guests, and they had got leeches on their feet. So we did have to be a little bit wary when botanizing of leeches and ticks. Well, in 2007, there was still an enormous amount of work to be done on the road system. So they were working on the infrastructure, and here you can see two more modern pieces of equipment, but they still at this time relied very heavily on the national workforce. And these are groups of Bangladeshis and Bhutanese people who live, they have little camps at the side of the road, and they work on the roads. And we saw ladies actually sitting cross-legged with little hammers breaking up stones and rocks. But I was concerned because they had no protection for their eyes. And when you read that little statement on this image, I can assure you there was no exaggeration whatsoever, because there were an estimated 17 bends per kilometre, and we were travelling uphill for hours. And even if you didn't have a problem with a travel sickness, by the second day you were very grateful for some tablets. Well, when the roadworks started, or we stopped to watch them, you could observe around you, and it was rather interesting to see the cattle grazing. They all have bells. All the cattle and the ponies have bells in Bhutan. Well, here you can see we are gaining altitude noticeably, but just look at how beautifully forested and green and lush all the hillsides are, because the Bhutanese are very, very focused on conservation. They don't want deforestation. They've seen what has happened in countries like Nepal. So they're passionate about it. They love their country. They respect it. They really protect it. So as travelers, you obviously are very aware of this. It's very heartening. Wonderful trees. This is an Asian tree called Albizia chinensis, which I've encountered in many countries, but it is widely used in Asia because it gives umbrella protection to the tea gardens. Cardiocrinum giganteum, the giant Himalayan lily. Well, to see that in full flower, you have to go in June, which is the best time also to see the Mecanopsis. And we think, of course, of the Himalayan blue poppy. Now, this is a wonderful plant, and this was introduced by the great plant hunter Ernest Wilson. It grows to quite a height, and it produces long, pendulous, creamy ivory, fragrant flowers. Paris polyphylla. Well, I always look at that name and have a little chuckle. I like the Paris family. They are very worthwhile growing, and like the Aracemas and the podophyllums, they're great woodlanders. Shortly afterwards, we reached the Chaka checkpost. Now, we were in a queue of vehicles. We were going to have our passports checked and our visas, and we were just behind this pickup truck with young monks in the back. Years ago, before state education, the Bhutanese families were very poor families, couldn't afford private education. So they sent their sons into the monastic order at an early age, and they were there for life because the families knew they would get an education and a living. Nowadays, they can actually buy themselves out. So they do pay for an education in that respect. Mount Shumalari rises to 7,314 meters. It is not the tallest mountain in Bhutan, but it is the most sacred. So they really revere this mountain. They do not actually greatly approve of mountain climbing because they believe that the gods live in the mountains. They live in the deity. And here on this high pass, we can see some very weathered prayer flags. I think they have an ethereal beauty to them. They're almost in tatters and they're bleached by the weather. They still have a beauty of their own. This is where the soil changed noticeably. You're getting a much more gritty, scree-like soil. This, of course, would be favorable to the Alpines, and this is where I photographed Pyrola. It's a member of the wintergreen family, and it was also where I saw two wonderful species rhododendrons, Campanulatum on our left-hand side with its delicate lavender, and Rhododendron arboreum, the wonderful tree rhododendron, as its name tells us. The first rhododendron to come to the United Kingdom, and really was kick-started all the fantastic hybrids that came to follow. Lanatum also was observed here, and because it's a high pass, it does endure hard conditions in the winter, and this makes it so understandable why the rhododendrons protect themselves with this marvelous felty indumentum comprising of thousands of hairs. It's camel colored, and it's also very tactile to the touch, like velvet. The Cheli La is where I photographed these specimens, and we are now up at 3,810 meters with views across the Har Valley to the Greater Himalayan range. It was quite a rocky area, as you can see, with all those stones, and we were just sort of trekking through those little narrow paths. It would have been an early trade route, but what was particularly unusual is the fact that we could see those mountain peaks, those snow-covered mountain peaks in the distance, because when I booked this tour, I was told you won't see the mountains because it's usually very wet in the spring. If you want to see the sublime mountain ranges, go in the autumn. But as you can see from this photograph, it was very dry. They'd had an unusual drought, and it had been quite a long drought. The grass here is really hardly visible. But at a lower altitude, when we dropped down, this was the gorgeous sight that we enjoyed. Deep sapphire blue Primula calderana. It's a wonderful primula, and it was growing quite extensively here. A little further still, Primula denticulata, the drumstick primula. Many of you probably grow it in your gardens, but have you ever seen it growing like this? It was fantastic. Meadows covered with denticulata, this haze of lavender blue, quite beautiful. The cattle were grazing amongst the primulas, and in the background you could see some little chalet-like buildings that made you think of Switzerland. But these are not true yak. They are a cross that the Bhutanese do between yak and cattle, because they actually are a much better tempered beast, but they still produce that wonderful yield of rich buttery milk. So you get the best of both worlds. The true yak by now would be grazing much higher up in the alpine pastures. Well, a little further down, wow, Rhododendron cinnabarinum, absolutely gorgeous, in varying shades, from the palest, sort of palest primrose yellow to deep rich tangerine. Very hard now to establish which is the true species, because these are natural hybrids. It's hybridized to create this range of shades of color. But they were doing really well, seemed exceedingly healthy and well settled in that particular spot. We reached Paro Airport. At the time of my visit in 2007, this was the only airport in Bhutan. Now there are others, but it does have the reputation of being one of the most dangerous airports to fly into in the world. So notorious. But it is certainly, to my mind, the most beautiful airport I've ever encountered, because the buildings in Bhutan have to be built in Bhutanese style. So that's why it looks so very attractive. Looking over it like a guardian is the Paro fortress heap of jewels. Indeed, in medieval times, these were fortresses, but now they really serve as encompassing the seat of local government. They would have a temple, and they would also have a monastery as well. Taxtang is probably the most famous monastery of all, and this is called the Tiger's Nest. You've probably read about it and seen photographs. It clings, if you follow my red arrow, it clings perilously to the side of a cliff, a very big cliff face. And that's where it is to be found. To reach it, you have to walk along a little path with no barrier, no rail, which has been hewn and cut into the rock face. I think, Gwendolyn, I don't know if you can mute all, but I think somebody's forgotten to turn off that unmute.
Rosemary, I've muted it. When I mute all, it mutes you. Try again. You're still muted. I've clicked.
I've clicked on unmuted.
Yes, you're there now.
I'm back. Good.
Good. Lovely.
Right, we're back on our trail, coming down from the Tiger's Nest, and the monastery is at 3,140 meters. And we actually saw this beautiful chorten on the way down, and you can see a very, very big prayer wheel in the center, which I couldn't resist ringing the right way. Well, during the course of the afternoon, we came to a lovely little valley where there was a natural spring feeding through. So you can see how lush the grass is, and that gorgeous, really sumptuous Primula sycamensis. It's a wonderful yellow, isn't it? Sulphur yellow. Close by was a stall with a Bhutanese couple selling various goods. And of particular note are those strings of cubes, of ivory cubes, and it's a hard cheese called chirpy. It's made from the milk of the yak, and it's a very desirable snack for the Bhutanese. And what they'll do is they'll buy a loop, and as they walk through the countryside, they'll chew on a piece of chirpy. At the Dokular, and the word la in Bhutanese means pass, you see the really quite extraordinary sight of the Chortens of Victory. Now, this was an idea of the Queen Mother of Bhutan. She wanted to celebrate a very short-lived war. It only lasted a couple of days, but it was a situation that had to be resolved because the Bhutan look on India as their friend and their protector. There were some rebels, Indian rebels, who were causing a great problem, a sort of terrorists on the border between Bhutan and India. They'd been asked to leave, various undertakings had been given, but they didn't go, so they had to be removed by force. And that was the sum total was, I'm afraid a few lives were lost, but victory was achieved. These elderly ladies I photographed near the pass at Dokular are wearing the national costume. For a lady, it comprises of a sheet of tartan-like material, if you imagine the size of a bed sheet, which they wrap around their bodies. They clip on their shoulder. They have a little silver clip on their shoulder. They wear a little blouse and a silk jacket over the top. And ladies, this flap in the front is their handbag. So hands-free, brilliant idea. Now, the costume for the ladies is called the kira, and it's very colourful, as you can appreciate. Well, more botanizing to undertake, and we still found some lovely green lush areas. Another cardiocrinum, and look at this, Rhododendron casei. Isn't it pretty? Delicate little trumpets of red fringed with orange. That's just so delightful. Who could say rhododendrons are boring? Acer campbellii, native acer of Bhutan. Lovely, fresh, green, lime green, lighting up the particular area. And Osmunda claytoniana, a fern that actually thrives in dry conditions. So that one is perfectly happy. Aracema griffithii, well, this one is another sumptuous plant. And you can see what they mean about the cobra lily, because it looks, always when I see it, looks like a cobra about to spring. And it's the most wonderful, if you imagine the color of pewter purple, interlaced with lime green. It's really fantastic. Aracema griffithii, named, of course, after the great plant hunter. Vaccinium retusum, now we saw that quite regularly on our travels. And then to the confluence of two rivers, it was one called the Mo and one called the Po, and they crossed here. And we used that rickety bridge to reach the Palace of Great Bliss. I think one of the most beautiful of the zongs, surrounded by smoky purple jacaranda trees in full bloom. It's the zong where the present young king of Bhutan was married not so many years ago to his beautiful queen. Goes back to 1637, so we can appreciate again the fact that they were fortresses. When you look at the entrance, the first section of steps are pretty steep. And then you get to an almost vertical section of wooden steps. And that actually is a drawbridge. It can still be drawn up even now. But here we have modern security with the Bhutanese policeman. He's talking to one of the monks. And behind them, you can see the murals, like frescoes. They depict the various Buddhist gods. This one is the god of the north, and he is the god of prosperity. Very, very bright colors. In some places, perhaps to our eyes, a little garish, but he's quite a character. And so is this little thunder dragon. Well, that's what I call him. He was just part of a very long, narrow frieze below the soffit of one of the buildings inside the Zong. But he just has the appearance, I think, of a thunder dragon. Look at the architecture. Fantastic carving, gilding. It's unique in its style. And then outside the temple, the monks have put down their saffron robes. They've gone in to pray in the temple. We were invited to go in, which we were very honored to do so. Naturally, you don't take photographs because it is a religious building. And that particular night, we stayed in little chalets beside this fast-flowing river. Our botanist guide, David Tattersfield, actually spotted a black otter early the following morning on one of those rocks. Every night we stayed somewhere different. It was such fun. Some accommodation was quite basic, and others was very, very almost palatial, shall we say, when you're trekking. And here we were in little chalets. Bearing in mind, we're still in that lower section of Bhutan, in the Punakha area, we saw plants such as Woodfordia fruticosa, and that was a vibrant array of twinkling orange flowers. Also Curcuma aromatica, the gingers. So again, that's telling us we're in, you know, reasonably tropical area. Agapiti serpents, well, we had gained altitude. We traveled on quite a bit to see those very attractive coral colored bells. But this was the valley to beat all valleys. Here we struck gold, because if you can imagine, the whole of the area you can see in this image of mine was covered with Rhododendron falconeri. It was some sight. And there were so many plants that wherever you trod on a carpet of seed, the seed from the previous year. So it was undercarpeted, and of course the seed stays there and the plants germinate where the seed falls. So you get this lush view of all these wonderful rhododendrons, and it is the most gorgeous rhododendron. It has a fabulous truss, a multitude of bell-shaped flowers with that lovely maroon speckling in the throat. It was a joy to see. You almost had to pinch yourself that you were there. Traveling on a little further, we had to stop to admire and enjoy the antics of a group of langur monkeys. They really were entertainers. They were gymnasts, swinging from the boughs, running across the road. Well, really enjoying, I think, giving us a performance. Up at the Pele La, and we're now at 3,300 meters, there are some more roadworks being undertaken, but you can see this gentleman has a hard hat, and behind him there's a rather old traction engine, but they were still depending on the work of the national workforce. It was lunchtime, I remember well, and it was a hot day, so they were pleased to have the shade of their umbrellas. We had to walk on with rumbling tummies down to Chenjebi Chorten in the valley here, which is known the place of eyes. That's what it's called. We couldn't help noticing two religious shrines. The one on the left is typically Bhutanese, the Chorten. The one on the right is Nepalese in design. And it had a little spire. If we take a closer look, I hope you can probably make out on your laptops the eyes that surround the base of the spire, hence the name, the place of eyes. This gentleman was regilding a Mani wall. The Mani walls have religious script on them. That's what he was regilding. And there were two ladies sitting beneath him, and they spoke to us in Bhutanese. And we said to Karma, what are they asking? And he said, they are asking for medicine for their eyes. He said, whenever I bring Europeans, they want medicine for their eyes. Well, of course, we had no medicine. We didn't know, obviously, what the condition was. But I've often thought since, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't have cataracts. This gentleman was watching us, and he is wearing the male attire, male national costume. For the man, it is called the go. It's basically a 3/4 length crossover dressing gown style jacket with wide cuffs. And most of the men wear, I would describe them as being like Bermuda shorts. This gentleman has long trousers. Well, one of the benefits of eating your sandwiches outside is that you look around you and you explore. And I was so thrilled when I found this Coleogene corymbosa. It was just the most perfect orchid. There wasn't one bloom that was going over. I've learned since from plantsman friends of mine that this is a very rare orchid now. I think even the group of Coleogene too is not as extensive as it was. But perhaps the biggest of all highlights came later in the afternoon when we were traveling along that road, looking up at the rocks. And we spotted, I don't know if you can see, a flash of white amongst the green, but that was Rhododendron edgeworthii, my favorite rhododendron species. And so we got out of the bus with binoculars and cameras, trying to capture it from, it was up at a great height. And we didn't notice that Kinzang, our driver, had disappeared. And then he came back grasping a piece of edgeworthii. And well, our hearts dropped and we all went, oh dear, we didn't want him to cut it. We were just content to see it in its habitat. But he knew it meant a lot for us to see. And this is the piece that he cut. It is a wonderful rhododendron, as we all know and appreciate. White, large, bell-shaped flowers, blushed pink, and it has this amazing, deeply grained, bottle green foliage, but it's the scent which is totally intoxicating. And it's a hard one to describe, but my mother and I used to say it reminded us of sweet nutmeg. Well, that was a joy, and it wasn't wasted because one of our group was a retired pediatrician, and she was a talented artist. She kept a journal of our travels, and she painted a lovely picture of the blossoms. We also discovered from Kinzang that the Bhutanese do cut it for temple decoration. Aristolochia, they're a group of intriguing plants, often referred to as the Dutchman's pipe. This form is Aristolochia griffithii, but what we have to bear in mind with them, they're climbers, they are very toxic plants. So you have to be warned about that. When these ancient zongs were built, the Bhutanese always planted a sacred capressus tree, and we can see one on the left-hand side of this image at the entrance to the zong. This particular zong was very, very strategically important because it governed the route between East and West Bhutan. So because of its situation, and you can get some idea here from the view. Tongsa Zong was built in 1644. It's still a busy zong. The monks are in residence, and this one is caressing the sacred cockerel because every monastery has a sacred cockerel. The monks were going about their duties. They were drawing water, and just to the left-hand side is the incense burner. And they do actually burn some pieces of the cypresses in the incense burner. It was our good fortune to be there on a morning when there was an important meeting being held by the various local dignitaries. These are VIPs. All the Buddhists, before they go into worship in a temple, wear a white silk shawl over their shoulders, which you can see here. And there were ladies and gentlemen, and also the coloured bands that they also designate that they are important people. A very delightful little Bhutanese family we encountered with their dog as we were trekking in the afternoon. And this I remember very well because here, this valley seemed to be carpeted with sphagnum moss. And of course, that created the most amazing natural resource to germinate all the seed that fell from the rhododendrons. And these are just a group of some of the young plants that had just grown, and they come up like mustard and cress. Bryocarpum himalayacum, delicate little nodding heads, and totally enchanting little plant. And I think the temple I personally loved best of all. It was very small, right in the heart of the countryside, 7th century, and it hadn't been restored. So you could see it in its original state. And these murals, I very much hope that they aren't restored. I love the colours. To me, they speak volumes. But what also speaks volumes is the fact that you can see a tiger, an image of a tiger, because they had tigers in Bhutan. And they thought they had lost their tigers until they found that they had moved up to higher altitudes. They had adapted to colder conditions, which is wonderful news. So they do have a safe corridor for the tigers, but of course they are always concerned about their proximity to China. Near Jaca was the site at Kerji of 3 monasteries, and the one in the centre is undoubtedly the oldest. We went in to see the young monks at their studies, and then we were taken upstairs because there was this wonderful sound of the monks meditating. The shutters, very, very heavy, ancient wooden shutters, were closed, but there were just shafts of light that sort of played across the room. And we sat down cross-legged and listened to the chanting. And it was the most incredible experience because it was so calming. You felt all your burdens were lifted, very therapeutic. Outside, close to those monasteries, this little lady we saw selling her wares. She was selling jewelry she had made, and she is dressed in the costume of the Bhutanese who live in those northern regions, so it's slightly different. And she's wearing a little plateau hat of straw-made hat. When we reached the Bumtang Valley and the Chamkar River, that's really where our real adventure began, because those are our trekking ponies crossing the suspension bridge. And we were going to actually camp for 6 days in the wilderness, very, very basic camping. Now, they weren't going to carry us. The ponies were actually coming for our kit to pick up our camping kit. And believe it or not, we stopped here for lunch. We were given 3 hot meals a day. Now, I never expected to have a hot lunch. And this was brought on the backs of 2 ponies. The food was delicious. The Buddhists are vegetarians. They do not eat meat. There are some fabulous vegetables grown in Bhutan. A lot of them are actually exported to India as well. And they make beautiful sauces. They grow potatoes. We'd had some asparagus before we went on our camp. And they do, if they have foreign travelers, they will bring in meat. Again, it usually comes from India, but you might have chicken, you could have lamb or beef. And they made some wonderful soups at night. Well, during the course of the afternoon, walking up to our very first campsite, we encountered these 4 schoolgirls. I call them my 4 little maids from school, are we? And they're dressed in school uniform, which of course is national costume. But what does surprise you is they come up to you and they say, "What is your name? Where do you come from?" Because they speak English. English is their second language, taught at school. And after a little conversation, they looked at me. They pointed to my face and they said, "What is that?" And I thought, oh gosh, what is that? And then I remembered that you put sunblock on and you sort of whack it on, don't you? You don't really quite know where you're going to hit. And they were intrigued. So I got it out to show them. And of course, they all wanted to try some, as we can see from the image. More treasures. Calanthe tricarinata, that was growing in the meadows, and Euphorbia griffithii. I grow that, and it comes from Bhutan. There was a newly born calf in the meadows as we approached our campsite. And this is where we spent our first night. We were very lucky. We didn't have to put our tents up or take them down. And we went to sleep at night with the sound of the barking deer. And then in the morning, we were awoken early by the bells of the ponies. The pony men released them to graze. And at 6 o'clock, we were brought a cup of tea and a dinner plate sized bowl of hot water to wash in. And I can assure you, become very adept at washing from head to toe in a bowl of warm water. So then all the kit had to be packed up by 7, and we had breakfast outside here, beautiful day, and we had a full English breakfast with porridge. That was great. You needed it for all the trekking. Well, we left before the pony men, but really we hadn't gone very far before they caught us up, because at every twist and turn of the path, there were more wonderful plants to stop and see and observe. During the course of that morning, Carm had been whittling away at a piece of bamboo, and he was making a pipe, because David, our botanist guide, smoked a pipe. But when he'd accomplished it, tried a bit of David's tobacco, he didn't like it. So we were quite pleased for his health. More valleys. Now here we saw some really fabulous moss and some gorgeous Paris. This is Paris violacea. It looked just like a starfish with that marbling, really gorgeous. And then Daphne beloa. Daphne beloa was growing here, native plant, and the Bhutanese do use the bark of Daphne together with the bark of Edgeworthia to make paper. And they particularly use it for their much sought after postal stamps, which are exquisite. And we tried to find some. We did eventually find a little post office, and we bought all the stamps that they had. And then, of course, the next challenge was to find somewhere that sold postcards. Podophyllums. Well, they certainly have a place in the garden, and they're quite diverse. This one, really, when you look at that very stout stem, it's a wonder that it produces those deep ruby red leaves and then that blossom of delicate translucent beauty. It's just a wonder. I love them, and they do grow very successfully in our gardens. Clintonia udinensis, a very dear plantsman friend of mine, when I showed him that photograph, said, "You were lucky to see the blue form. We've only ever seen the white." But this is probably the thrill of the day, that particular day, seeing Daphne Ludlowii. David took us here. It was the only place that he was aware of where it grew in Bhutan. We wouldn't have seen it if we hadn't been trekking. And it's fairly newly discovered, was certainly in 2007. Running rootstock, as you can see, it carpets the ground. It's not very tall, but it has clusters of sulfur yellow flowers, pendant flowers, but they are not fragrant. You can't have everything, can you? But that was very exciting. Meconopsis paniculata, but of course, as I mentioned, you have to really go in June to see the best of the Meconopsis. And gaining altitude all the time, it was interesting to see how the trees changed your canopy. And not far from here, this Cinnabarinum, canary yellow, the most sumptuous waxy yellow flowers, very tactile. It was a cracker of a plant. It really was. Campylorcarpum too, that wasn't too far away. So in that sort of altitude, that region, more of a lemon yellow coloured flower. I like Campylorcarpum and I like the shape of its foliage. But this is where we left the pastures, the grassy pastures behind us, and we came to this very stiff bamboo, which is called cham. It is somewhat controlled by the ponies and the yak who graze on it, but it's tough when you're walking through it. When you've been walking through it for a few hours, there are little paths, as you can see, through there. This is definitely a trade route. This would have been an old ancient trade route. And these two chortens served a twofold purpose. They were religious shrines, but they also gave comfort and protection to those early travelers and traders, because in the winter, and this position, it could have been bitterly cold, blizzards, snow. They could actually shelter overnight, even perhaps light a little fire. And then in the summer, they would have a protection from the heat. What I didn't also expect was to see something of such beauty as this mandala. A mandala is a very precious symbol, and it basically, it is a cosmic circle, and to the mystic cosmic circle, and it's like a religious diagram, if I can describe it like that. So very important to the Buddhist faith and religion. There were stones with the script, the religious script on them, but these weren't painted. These had been carved. So that was an act of great skill. Trillium govnianum, well, that was growing here. Beautiful trilliums, and also the roscoes. And this is Tibetica. I've become very fond of them. I find they're a really lovely group of plants. Different colours. Triflorum, very pretty chartreuse yellow with that wonderful lime green or olive green almost speckling in the throat. Delicate flowers, like butterflies. Erythema nepenthoides, another good example of why it's called the cobra lily, that hooded effect of the snake. Lovely marking. I like the foliage too on nepenthoides. And a euphorbia I'd never encountered before, and this is called Strachii. To me, it resembled a little Victorian posy. I'd really like to very much to be able to grow that in my garden. After we'd admired these plants, we had to negotiate a river. It wasn't very deep, and the only means of crossing it was over a stump of wood, a large stump of wood, which we managed to do successfully. And then in the distance, we could hear some musical instruments being played. We could hear this sound approaching, and it was a group of wandering minstrels, troubadours. And we asked Karma what they were doing, and he said, oh, they are parading religious effects, and they're going from hamlet to hamlet, praying for rain and taking religious donations, money donations. So we gave them some money, but after they'd passed, Karma was not a happy man. They stopped to play for us, and he said, they are too merry. They are much too merry. He said they have been enjoying too much liquid hospitality en route. And of course, the Buddhists do not drink alcohol, or they're not supposed to. Well, they passed us and they had to negotiate the river crossing, and we did actually hear two very loud sploshes. So I think we can all guess what happened there. These schoolgirls had to be photographed. Everyone has a best friend, don't they? And it was noticeable that all the girls and the ladies in Bhutan have this pudding basin haircut, except when we got to Thimphu and you saw ladies with longer hair. But this seemed to be the general rule. One of our campsites, the children would come and visit us after school. It was always lovely to talk to them. This is one of the mess tents, the green tent, and I can see a big bundle of wonderful spinach, the vegetables that were waiting to be prepared for our supper and also used in the lovely soups. The following day, Karma took us into the local primary school at Kangrab. The headmaster is standing, taking morning assembly. They have said their prayers and they're singing the national anthem. And then we were taken to the classrooms and they sang to us and we sang back to them. The curriculum notice board had a picture of an archer because archery is the national sport in Bhutan. You may recollect that a small group of archers came to the London Olympics and they took part. But what was evident in 2007 was, although they were very proud of their library, what limited resources they had. When I think of all the resources our school children have here at home, but what they had, they respected. And there were some very profound pieces here displayed on the wall, particularly from Nelson Mandela. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Very, very meaningful words. This lady with her winsome smile was walking through the countryside. We met her and she is spinning. She's holding a spinning top in one hand and a ball of wool in the other. And I love this gentleman's moustaches. I mentioned how medieval some parts of Bhutan appeared still to be, because although hydroelectricity is their major export, it goes to India, it was very apparent in places we stayed that they had limited resources. So the lights would go off, there would be oil lamps and candles. And then in this little hamlet, you can actually see where they're milling the grain. So again, very basic methods. Most of the houses do have some sort of relief on there, artistic relief, and this is actually one of a tiger. A countryside area with apple trees, a lot of apple trees. Fruit is grown widely. They can quite a lot of their fruit. They also make jams. They make a lot of cheese. And the fruit does go as an export. but this particular planting of apple trees, this orchard, surrounded a former palace. It was probably, we would say it was more like a country house estate. It's now being turned into a museum. So this is what they have in mind. But I was amused by this depiction of a mermaid in one of the areas, because we're thousands of miles away from the sea. And then these beautiful prayer wheels, quite a work of art. And we can see the frieze at the top features the oriental lilies. This was another lunch stop, and I think we'd walked for about 7 or 8 hours at the end of that day. And we stopped here midway. And I remember that David looked at the top of the range, the wooded sort of top horizon here in this picture. And he said, you've all got to be up there by the end of the afternoon. And we were feeling very weary, but refreshed after this pony had bought our lunch. Somehow plants just stimulate your excitement and thrill, and you forget about your feet and your boots, and these were just some. The primulas, Primula edgeworthii, Rhododendron thomsonii, well, that was in flower, crimson red, waxy bell-shaped flowers, and it's got such a gorgeous glaucous foliage, you know, the established foliage. Wonderful rhododendron. There are some close-ups. And then these primulas, Dickiana, small calderana. This one is just emerging in the bottom left, and you can see the farina is obvious. And Primula hookeri, they were like little posies. Fock Fay, we had reached 3,680 meters, and this was the highest campsite that we used, or we made. And we camped, our tents were in that cham, in that rough bamboo. It was the only night it rained, and it was a cold night. The others had been, you know, very comfortable. The following day, we were going up even further, but the ponies had to stay here. So anybody who wasn't feeling 100% couldn't go. Fortunately, our group were all fit and well. The reason they don't take the ponies is because it's very treacherous. Sulia virginata, that was just emerging from the bracken. And then Rhododendron hodgsonii, really tremendous truss of blossom, and those almost exaggerated leaves, but just look at the indimentum. It's rusty orange, isn't it? Wonderful, wonderful color. That was growing in that altitude, so it gives you some idea. Also whitei, that's a wonderful rhododendron, fragrant, very frilled, deckled, beautiful edges to the petals. And this again is an interesting observation of a natural hybrid, and I would speculate that the thomsonii was probably one of the parent plants and whitei the other. Certainly very interesting to see. Now this is what they meant about the ponies. Much too treacherous for them, all these loose stones and rocks. They could so easily break a leg. And the whole aspect changed here. The rhododendrons were much tougher. They had hardier conditions to endure. Lepidotum was one we noticed. But interestingly enough, a lot of whitei. And you can still see there is some snow under these plants of whitei. When I did this tour, I spoke to Philip Evans, and he had actually been, I'm trying to recall how many years before me. I don't think it was less than 7, maybe 10, but he said there was much more snow. And when they reached this place, the Rhododendron, they actually saw tiger paw prints in the snow, which was incredible. The Rhododendron, our highest point, 4,039 meters, and we're looking back down into the valley. Well, this is not a place where tourists come because the Bhutanese a little bit unwary of it, uneasy perhaps. They sort of just think it's sort of got a strange feel about it, eerie feel about it. But the little dots of yellow we can see in this image, those are blooms on whitei. So that is a bank of whitei rhododendron. And there is David Tattersfield, our wonderful botanist guide. And here we are looking across into East Bhutan, which is open to visitors, but you have to have additional paperwork to go into East Bhutan. And we were just here on the cusp between East and West Bhutan, the border. Well, walking back down, we are walking towards the pastures, and there are some more rather bizarre plants. This is Rhodiola himalayensis, rather like a octopus, I think, spreading out its tentacles. And we saw Gentiana ornata, and we saw Edelweiss growing here. Made us think of Switzerland. And indeed, this is where the farmers come to graze their cattle. And walking round one corner, we came across this farmer, and he was sitting on a rock with his tethered cattle. And to my mind, he looked rather like a little pixie sat there. And then back to the Chamkar River. Well, this is where the adventure began. And sadly, that camping was going to end. But we had to wait for the farmers to get the cattle across, much to the amusement of this gentleman. And close by, there were paddy fields. So we're looking at the flooded fields, and they were bordered with Elaeagnus parvifolia. In this particular area, we saw Osmanda. They were enjoying the moisture. Osmanda cinnamomea, I'd never seen. I was delighted to see that because it's got these wonderful, rich cinnamon-coloured stripes. And this is, of course, the very much loved Osmanda regalis, the royal fern. Our very last campsite, the last one, very special, was here by the river, and we were so thrilled to paddle in that water safely. No ticks. And then we had dropped down 2,621 meters. This was the mess tent, and we were enjoying a very welcome cup of tea. At night, we had to make sure we had our headlights and our torches just to make sure, you know, we got back to the right tent, and little visitors to bid farewell. We actually felt very sad because that was the day that we lost all our family. We had the two pony men on the left-hand side, and then in the centre, in the blue shirt, was Kombi, our cook, and he did prepare some lovely meals, and his camp helpers. And they were all charming and delightful and very kind. The pony men had to saddle up the ponies because they had to go all the way back. And they took with them two dogs. We call them the camp dogs. And this black and tan dog is very typical of the Bhutanese dogs, and the little black one had adopted us. And if they're canny dogs, they will join a camping trek, because especially if they're Brits, we give them the sausages, don't we, at breakfast, and all the goodies, because they aren't really spayed. This is the problem. So there are a lot of stray dogs. The Bhutanese really, I don't suppose there are many vets. I don't expect they could afford the veterinary fees. So this is a bit of a problem, and you do see quite a few suffering from mange. More roadworks. Kinsang had come with a little truck to pick us up, and then we were taken into a local hospital. So this is a clinic, and there was just one doctor and one nurse in this clinic. We met them, they took us around the hospital, very basic little wards with iron bedsteads. And the nurse, who was a very serene lady, she showed us a pharmacy. She was telling us about the clinic, that most of the mothers prefer to have home confinements, but they do have a labour ward. And she took us into the pharmacy, but they did not have a big range of medicines. It was very limited. Weaving is a cottage industry. They weave a lot of the fabrics that comprise of the costumes and the uniforms, and also mats and bags made out of wool. They also sold here the ceremonial boots that are worn with the national costume. Well, although there, of course, is not that much traffic on the roads, we actually encountered a collision between a truck and a car, and everything stops until the policeman arrives to assess it. On the truck, and you'll notice how brightly coloured and attractively painted and decorated these trucks are, and you see them all over Asia, there had been tied a bunch of Dalhousii. And during the impact of the crash, it fell onto the road. So we were able to photograph it more closely and admire it. The very last rhododendron that I saw was Rhododendron ciliatum. And that is just going over, but it's a lovely rhododendron in its own right. Parent plant of some interesting hybrids. On our travels, we found in the middle of the road these long strips of bamboo, and they're left in the road to be crushed by the vehicles. And then a couple of Bhutanese gentlemen sat at the side of the road and wove them into these amazing stocks. And they just were, I mean, they're functional, they're making very functional items, but they were panels and stocks, but what a lovely design. It's a work of art in its own right. At Gangti Gompa, an ancient 450-year-old monastery with some imposing doors, and this handle, which I think could tell a few stories. In the forecourt, in this sort of area outside of the entrance, they were hewing immense timber beams by hand with an adze, and these were being used for restoration work on the existing buildings which had beetle damage, but also to make a very new temple. So we walked through those beautifully decorated gates, and this is the temple that they're constructing. You'll see monastic cells on either side, you know, two parallel lines, but we could go into the temple and we could see the various tradesmen at their crafts, the plastering, the carving, and beautiful handicrafts, very talented craftsmen. There was a small piece of frieze which you may find possibly difficult to see, but in the center of that frieze are some cranes. They've carved some cranes because this particular area, the Gangti Gompa, is the only place where the black-necked cranes fly in October. They fly over the Himalayas from Tibet to overwinter in this one region of Bhutan. So ornithologists come from all over the world to actually see them. And these are the monks that reside here in the monastery, and they were very interested in all the happenings. You can see what was going on, particularly here in the carpentry section. Perhaps you might wonder what the shops are like in Bhutan. And this is one such in a hamlet. A nice peony Fruticosa lutea in their little garden just to the side, but they sell just about everything you require. So this would be your local Sainsbury's perhaps. And they weren't very much different in the towns, because they were probably like these little chalets. You see, this is one, for example. They have a charm of their own. I hope they don't change too much. Now, looking at this picture, in a matter of days, that hillside will be awash, ablaze with colour from rhododendrons that are literally scattered all amongst the trees there. We just get some impression of the colours that are emerging. And we see plants such as Magnolia Michelia dolsopa. That was in bud. It's something about the magnolias and some of the Michelias, isn't it, that the little buds are like light bulbs emerging. But this really was undescribable. How does a rhododendron falconeri manage to exist on a ledge of a rock with no soil to speak of, and then produce a truss of flower? I think it's a miracle. We did see one Meconopsis in flower, villosa. We were very fortunate. And this was up a little rocky ledge. David was photographing it and Carla was sketching it. And I'll just give you a close-up picture of what it was like. It had rained and all the droplets of water sparkled like little diamonds on the delicate petals. And then we reached Thimphu. Thimphu is the capital of Bhutan, and we're now at 2,286 meters. And this was a gathering on a Saturday morning of Boy Scouts and Girl Guides in the central square. Thimphu, very recognizable as a capital with some very Western type shops, not too many, not some of the takeaways, but bookshops and very good shops like that, and also stalls. We can see the stalls here that were selling carved wooden items, but very importantly, arrows. Just outside Thimphu, in some of the areas like playing fields, they were actually holding archery competitions. Not far away is the takin preserve, because the takin is the national animal, and it's a mixture between a moose, almost like a reindeer. It's a cloven hoofed creature, as you can see from here, and it really is quite unique again, this takin, and very interesting to go and actually see it in the preserve. The most significant and important and impressive zone is here in Thimphu, and this is where the young king of Bhutan was crowned not so very many years ago. His father had belief that Bhutan had to evolve. They didn't want it to change, but they recognized that time doesn't stand still. And to try and retain as many of the things they held dear, it had to evolve. So therefore, he wanted a two-party electoral system and a constitutional monarchy. Now, Karma said that the Bhutanese were not at all keen to change. They revere their royal family, they're greatly thought of and loved, but this was a very sensible move. But what I think is exceptional is that his father, the king's father, had this unique philosophy of governance, which measures the country's progress and development by its gross national happiness. I think that speaks volumes. Well, here we see the young king wearing the raven crown at his coronation. And afterwards, he went out into the crowds to speak to his people, to greet them. Well, a lovely memory. And when I sat in the aircraft and we were taxiing along the runway at Paro Airport, my mind was abuzz of everything I'd seen and how very fortunate I was and how privileged to go to this amazing country. And then I just thought about the mandala and the plants and the people, the lovely Bhutanese people. And we soared up into the heavens, and the aeroplane was so close to the summit of Mount Everest. I felt I was in touching distance and that it just couldn't have got better than that. It was the most wonderful, wonderful experience. And it has been my pleasure to share it with you and our love of rhododendrons and plants. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Well, thank you so much for that talk, Rosemary. We've talked a number of times, haven't we, about planning this talk, and I can now see why every time we've spoken about it, you have just been so excited, because what a journey, what plants, and what an experience. Thank you. Look, we've just had a remark there from Mark Bobin saying, well done, thank you. Uma saying, thank you for taking us on the journey. I'd love to unmute, if I can, everybody. I only seem to be able to mute everybody. I can't unmute everybody. Rosemary, are you able to do it at your end?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
You have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself once the central control's been lifted.
Yes, I can. I think we can hear everybody.
I did unmute myself, but you can't hear me.
Yes, we can.
We can hear you. We
Yes,
can.
yes.
We're getting so many thanks into the chat, and I wanted everyone to please share with me in appreciation for Rosemary, because we enjoyed that talk so much.
Thank you.
And I'd like to invite questions, but if we could please, because we have so many participants, could you please submit your questions on the chat, and I'll facilitate them for you. But before we go, we'll give everyone a bit of a chance, Rosemary, to have a think about questions they would like to ask.
Yes.
But I wanted to ask one small question about whether you encountered any rhododendrons in Bhutan that were on the red list for Bhutan.
I don't know, because of course things have changed. What I must point out, we went in 2007, so that of course was 7 years before the Nagoya Protocol.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes,
that came in. We were there 7 years, a good 7 years before that became effective.
Yes. So you were actually a lot earlier.
We were.
Have you noticed that any of them that you were encountering while you were there are now more rare?
I think that is probably a question that Mark or Seamus could answer better than me. But undoubtedly there will be some. Undoubtedly, I think
because the number of and range of plants that you've spoken about today, I mean, you know, my page is absolutely full, and I'm just glad to let everybody know that this has been recorded, and we'll be putting it up onto our RCM YouTube channel, so they can return to it again, because you almost couldn't keep up with the number of and variety of plants. You sort of watch, oh, look at that, oh, look at that, I'll write that one down. So it would be great to be able to return to it again. Let me just see if I have anyone asking.
Gwendolyn, may I don't wish to interrupt you, may I just mention that I've given you a list
Oh yes,
of
do.
books, because I find this very helpful. People are so interested in the country, and I've given Gwendolyn a list of books on Bhutan that are fairly comprehensive lists of different aspects, and one in particular is written by the Queen Mother of Bhutan. It's her personal view, and that isn't technical. And there's a range of different books that you might,
Yes,
some
yes.
people may be interested in getting.
I'll tell you what I will do, Rosemary. We will probably, sorry, I'm just going to mute again. We're going to probably put that up and share it through social media and on the website. I'm just asking you to unmute again now, Rosemary. Sorry, we had a lot of background voices going on there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Fine.
We will definitely put that up and make that available for people, because it's going to be a really useful reference for them. I'm just having a quick look on the chat. You have got so many comments saying a fantastic, incredible talk, and from people all around the world. We had so many people from so many different countries attending. I believe we've also had Drelzel's mother attending from Bhutan, so
how wonderful.
that's lovely. And one of the things that I picked up on in your talk was this really incredible scattering of seeds that just seemed to be growing like a carpet. And you mentioned sphagnum moss as the underlay, as it were. Was that something that you found the whole layer of soil to be very, very spongy? Was it very spongy to walk on, or was it quite rocky and then you had that sphagnum moss layer and they were?
Yes, it wasn't spongy. There might have been just little areas, but I know what you're thinking of, where you see a lot of sphagnum moss in boggy conditions. They weren't boggy conditions. It definitely held the moisture. There were slopes, they were wooded, so they had the dapple shade. In some areas there were springs which fed the irrigation in that area. But in particular, that one area, it was just so remarkable. It was as if nature was the nurseryman growing. The conditions were so perfect to get that wonderful germination. And the road, you felt awful just walking through there, because it was like mustard and cress. All these wonderful little rhododendrons growing up. It was incredible.
Wouldn't it be fantastic to be able to recreate that in our gardens here? It makes me feel quite excited about whether that would be possible to do, and really interesting that it's quite different from other types of Himalayan environments as well. And that you're still getting that incredible fertility for the rhododendrons, because of course Bhutan is very much a corridor within the Himalayas between different countries, where you're getting different species meeting and cross-pollinating within the valleys and mountains in Bhutan. I'm just going to double check again that we haven't got anyone coming up. We've got a hard question from Mark. He says, did you have a favorite plant in flower or not?
Oh, Mark, goodness. Is this within our genera? Are you thinking, Mark, in our genera? Well, I suppose it would be whitey, really, because I really wanted to see whitey. I mean, I love Edgeworthii is my favorite. So I suppose my greatest desire was to see Edgeworthii growing in its habitat, in its natural conditions. But the whitey, that was lovely too. Oh gosh, And then there was Thomsonia. It's really hard.
Yeah. That was an incredible specimen of the Thomsonii that you showed, wasn't it?
It was a good one, wasn't it? Yes,
Mm.
it was a lovely form of it.
Mm.
I'd be interested to know what Mark thinks. Do you think that natural hybrid, Mark, could have been a natural cross between Thomsonii and Whitey?
Yeah, it looks so, and as you know, if it was fairly close together as well, it did look pretty good.
Yes, yes, that was my feeling. And the Cinnabrinums, they were, you know, I think of you particularly there.
Yeah, absolutely. That was absolutely gorgeous.
Yes.
And to see so much flower on them all at once as well. That
Oh,
was
yes.
very impressive.
And the shades.
When I was in Bhutan, that the trekking guides were eating the flowers of Cinnabrinum.
Really?
Edible, yeah.
Oh gosh, yes, you don't think about that, do you?
No.
Yes.
Oh, that's really interesting because of the toxins that they contain. The Cinnabrinum, I wouldn't recommend anybody listening today to eat Cinnabrinum flowers or leaves because they contain a nerve toxin that causes cell death. If the people in Bhutan are eating them, they will be eating them for very specific reasons. Potentially medicinal reasons.
Yeah, they said medicinal. Yeah, it was
yes,
just a corolla.
Yes, and so it's really important to recognise that those people may be taking them for very specific reasons, and not something that we should generally encourage unless it's been diagnosed by a Bhutanese doctor, I would guess, or a traditional medicine doctor. But speaking of traditional medicine, Rosemary, I was so excited to see the Rhodiola mimolensis that you showed. I've never actually seen a photograph of that growing in the wild.
Really?
And for me, that's a really exciting medicinal plant from the Himalayas. It's used for the blood. Particularly as a medicine for blood cancer.
And, really?
Yes.
Gosh, how interesting! Well, that's fascinating to hear.
And it's such an interesting looking plant, isn't it? I've only ever sketched it before in a Tibetan form. I've only ever done drawings of it. So really excited to see that, and also just so many other different plants that we don't necessarily encounter, like the Primula, the sapphire blue one. What was it, Primula?
Oh, Calderana.
That's right.
Yes.
Wow, what a plant!
Yes, what a colour. Oh yes, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? It's a fabulous colour. Yes, very intense and vibrant blue. Yes.
Now, I think we might have another question. Let's see. This is from John Weigel. Great talk, he says. Was the Brodicarpum widespread in its locality? Hope for true whitey-eyes hardiness at 4,039 meters. That's from Nova Scotia.
Well, John, thank you for your question. How wonderful to hear where you are. No, the Brodicarpum wasn't widespread in the area I saw it. Yes, and I agree with you. Wouldn't it be wonderful? Hope for true hardiness of whitey-eye. Yes, that would be splendid.
And was the Brodicarpum widespread in the locality?
No, that's what I meant. It wasn't widespread in that.
Yes. Oh, okay.
No, it wasn't anything. I mean, if you imagine how the primulas appeared, it was nothing like that. It was more sporadic.
Okay. We have another question from Trevor Nicholson. Was the Daphne ludlowii found on the Pepela?
Trevor, I think, are you referring probably to the Pelela, the very first, in the first part of my talk? I think probably you are. No, we didn't see any Daphne there. That's where we saw Campanulatum and Arboreum. and Lanatum, but the Daphne ludloii was much further on in our botanical tour, and it was in a wooded area. It would have had, thinking about it, moisture. Where the Pelila was, it was much drier. There wasn't umbrella coverage, so it was quite open. But where the Daphne ludloii was, it was much more wooded and sheltered.
Yes, I've seen it there as well, and I thought it was the Fefila that it was called. It was a high wooded pass, very moist, quite protected.
Yes. I wonder, did you go? I went with Nature Trek. Did you go with Nature Trek or another company?
No, I went. Well, I went on my own actually. I went courtesy of the royal family in Bhutan, and they sent me on this trek with one of their guides.
How
and they said it's the only place where it's found in the world. Actually,
yes. Yes. Well, weren't we lucky to see it?
Yeah. Well, amazing. I went a year before you in 2006, and we did the Bhutan trek.
Yes.
And obviously botanized along the national highway, and then we did the Druk Path trek at the end, which is higher altitude in the Jumalhari region.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, how marvelous. Yes, we didn't get up as high as that. Oh, how long were you there for, Trevor?
Just a month.
Oh, unforgettable.
Yeah, I did some work in the royal parks as well, for the royal family, but I'd had 2 weeks to do some trekking. So very lucky.
When you say the royal family, are we talking of the Bhutanese royal family?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Oh, and do you keep up a connection with them?
Yes. Well, David Lascelles, so I work at Harewood House, and David Lascelles just the other night did a talk about his new book, which is the story of an English stupa. And it's a journey between Bhutan and Yorkshire, and the Bhutanese monks came over to Harewood House to build a unique stupa. It's the only stupa in Europe of its type outside Bhutan. And there's a whole story about the making of the Himalayan garden at Harewood House. And I went to Bhutan after the stupa was built to kind of study the plants in Bhutan in their natural habitats, with a view to obviously recreating those conditions in Harewood.
Yes,
and anyone who's listening who hasn't visited Harewood House simply must, because the collection there is absolutely stunning. Well,
you're very welcome to.
Oh gosh, it sounds that Trevor, it sounds as if you should be giving us a talk in the very
absolutely.
Trevor,
stay on afterwards and we'll have a little chat.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do a talk about the making of the Himalayan garden, because it goes back to Princess Mary's time and her very strong connection with the Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh.
Yes, it's beautiful. It's been many years since I've been there, but absolutely stunning memory in my mind of visiting. A blaze of colour.
Trevor, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you for your talk. Amazing.
I've just got another question here. I'm not sure of the name of the viewer, but they say, were you able to collect and bring back seed?
Oh, that's always a difficult question, isn't it? The problem was with so much seed on the ground, you couldn't avoid it. So, obviously it does get onto your boots, doesn't it?
Full of seed. Well, yes, it's an inadvertent return of seeds. That's lovely. The same person seems to be asking also whereabouts you live, and of course Rosemary is in Dorset, just down the road from me, and it says, is your garden full of rhododendrons?
Well, yes, I do indeed live in Dorset, but I live in East Dorset, like Wendelin, so we're at the far-flung corner and we do have acid soil. So we're very fortunate because we're very close to the Hampshire border. In fact, my father, who was a rhododendron hybridist and nurseryman, used to say it was continuation of the Bagshot Sands. We have a garden now of just under an acre, so it's not a big garden, but it's big enough now for us. And yes, it does have the rhododendron family do reign supreme here. I have a predominance of my father's hybrids in the garden, which give us great joy, and most of them are his hybrids. Azaleas, evergreen azaleas, deciduous and rhododendrons, and camellias too. So yes, they give us immense joy.
Wonderful. I think the viewer, I'm not sure who they are, might like to have a look at our YouTube channel and watch a previous talk by Rosemary about her life in rhododendrons and azaleas, which they might enjoy. We have had such a wonderful opportunity to hear about Bhutan from you today, Rosemary. And one of the things that I know I certainly appreciated and enjoyed very much was being able to hear some of the experiences that you had in relation to the people and the culture as well. And I wanted to pick up on one little thing about the mermaid with you. They can sometimes be called mermaids, but they're actually nagas, which is a kind of it's like a mermaid.
Yes, yes.
It's a water being between a woman or sometimes a man and a type of a sort of a snake fish, you know, like a water snake.
Yes.
And they are environmental spirits. So, you know, you were talking about the mountains, and the Bhutanese really like to go up into the mountains. It's the same with waterways, particularly lakes. So someone from Bhutan would never, ever go swimming in a lake, because it's the area, the space of the nagas, and it will upset them very much. And this also feeds into what you were talking about at the beginning in terms of conservation in Bhutan and the protection of the environment in Bhutan, which is so culturally important. And it's why they have such a fantastic mechanism within the country that supports the environment through the Environment Agency, as well as through major conservation funding that goes into Bhutan now from their government. We really can learn a lot from that, I think.
Oh, definitely. Yes.
We could catch up a little bit with some of the environmental protection ideas that we might think of as rather more unusual in the West, but having that association between the deities and the land for the Bhutanese is absolutely fundamental. So that's very much, you will have seen a naga there as a type of a protective blessing for whichever space, you know, and making an offering to that particular locale's naga. Don't upset the nagas.
Yes, keep her happy.
Keep her happy.
Look after your naga.
Keep her happy, and then the water will be happy, and with happy water we have happy environment. So it was lovely to see them, and beautiful to see the mandala as well. So unless we've got any more questions,
I think is it Elizabeth Ketley?
Can you see it? I seem to have lost my chat. If you can see it.
I'm not sure if it's a question. It was a very kind thank you from Elizabeth Ketley from the Valley Gardens in Cheshire.
Oh, that's nice. We've had so many people offering so much thanks for such an incredible talk, Rosemary. So we will reshare the link with people. I'll make sure that over the next few days we get your book list put up as well. And yes, well, we hope we shall be seeing you in person speaking at some point again soon.
Well, thank you very much. It's lovely to have been with you all this afternoon, and happy gardening. Happy growing. Goodbye. Bye.
Bye.
Trevor, you wanted to stay on for a moment to speak. Let me just
Yeah.
see if I can.